to India and Ireland, round Africa and back again. We don't really need to know just where we'll go. Maybe Canada, then to Brazil, then through the Alpine foothills. All I really want to know is, can we go? Oh baby, can we go? Round and around the globe.
Welcome to Take Me With You, episode 96. I'm Ryan,
And I'm Cheryl. We are two well-traveled people who want to go everywhere.
but that's not going to happen. So instead, we'll travel vicariously by inviting a guest to share their unique travel stories with us.
This summer, we are taking a break from guests to watch some travel shows, and we are on our last show.
Last show already, Cheryl?
Yes.
Does that mean it's almost the end of the summer?
Uh-huh. It does.
Wow.
Yeah, which is good because apparently your brain has turned to mush, so I think you need to get back to work.
It's because it's hot. My condo gets up to like 80 degrees inside. It's no fun. I'm just going to whine here because that's clearly fun to listen
Nope,
to.
let's talk about TV instead.
Oh, okay. That's probably a little bit more fun. So what show did we watch to round this up? End up
Well-
our series?
Ryan, you
Yes,
pointed
Cheryl?
something out to me really interesting last week
Yeah.
that I did not notice, but you noticed.
Well, I didn't notice it until our last week of the
Yeah,
series.
but you should share.
Well, I just noticed that all of the hosts of all of the shows that we've watched have been male. And we don't have any travel show hosts that are female at all. And when you go and look at travel shows, part of that reason is because there aren't very many that have a female host. But
Ah.
we found one that does. So we decided to do one with a female host.
Yeah, so we watched Samantha Brown's Places to Love. And she has had a lot of travel shows, and her first one was in
Yes.
like 2000.
I think I remember because she looks familiar to me, her face, when I watched it. And I think that I had seen some show that she did probably back in the early 2000s, like on the Travel Channel or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds about right. So this is a PBS show, but she's done a number of shows, and she is delightful.
She really is.
Oh my gosh. I was trying to figure out like if we got like a delightfulness competition between the hosts of the shows we watched. I mean, Rick Steves is pretty delightful too, but I was like, I want them to have a competition to see who is more pleasant, which would be very funny.
I think, and she's positive, but genuine.
Mm-hmm.
It's not forced. It's not fake. One of the things that I really appreciated about the show is in the very beginning, they do the intro, which a lot of the travel shows we watched have done, where they kind of give you the premise of the show. And she talks about, hey, I've done a lot of travel and I've been to a lot of these different places. And she lists things about places that she loves, because it's, of course, called Places to Love. But she says, but the real thing that I love is the people. And you really see that in the show. It
Yes.
really is about the people that she meets in these places. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with you. And I think that even comes down to how it's edited, that at the end of every episode, you get a little synopsis on the place you just saw. And the people giving the narration are the various people who were interviewed during the
Right.
episode.
Yes.
So it's the locals making statements about their place. And you can, I don't know, I think in the way she interviews people too, it's very personable and relational. And it really feels like she's just making friends and traveling and hanging out with new friends. And so, of course, I loved it a lot. And there's food. There's food in this show.
And that is important to you, Cheryl?
So much. Yeah.
But for someone who it's less important like me, it's not all about the food either. Food is in it, but it's not a food show.
Yes, that's very true. This is a travel show.
It is.
And
it definitely is.
I thought it was also the right amount of learning about a place. It's actually quite a lot of learning about a place. There's a lot of education about the place, but it doesn't just have history as the point of view or being a tourist. It has like several different filters for the point of view as you're learning about the place.
Mm-hmm. But again, I think it's because the primary lens is the people who live there and their perspective. And so they bring in some of the history or they bring in some of the culture, but it's all from them as opposed to from, well, and then I went to this art museum and here's this background on this thing. And here's this painter that is really great. And here's all the reasons why, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But I think that's what we more often have seen in travel shows that are trying to tell you about stuff. Whereas this, it's just the local people are going to tell us about where they live.
Yeah.
And what they do.
Yeah. So it was good. We liked it, clearly. And it was a 30-minute show. So,
yep. I've been thinking about that. So which episode did you watch, Cheryl?
So as we've done with all our other episodes, we each watched an episode from a place that we have been to. So I have been to Brooklyn, New York. So that's the one that I watched.
Okay.
And that was from season 1. So she's had 3 seasons of this show. And season 3, I think, just came out this year.
I think that's right. Because this is a relatively new show. It hasn't been around for very long.
Yeah. So one of my first notes was, actually I put it in later, is there's just good footage in this show. It's well filmed. And the sound quality is good. She is outdoors all over the place, and I'm very impressed with their sound quality.
That's a good point.
One thing she shares right off the bat about Brooklyn is that if it weren't for its borough status, it would be the 4th largest city in America.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I had no idea.
Oh,
I also don't totally understand boroughs.
I only know what I've heard, and I've never even been to New York. So I think a borough is the idea of an area. When you talk about like Brooklyn or Queens or whatever the other ones are in New York that everybody seems to know and it's in TV all the time and I have no idea. But like each of those, I think, is what they call a borough, which is just like an area.
Neighborhood. Kind of.
Yeah, there you go. Neighborhood. Something like that.
Listeners, write in. Tell us what a borough is. We can't look it up. It's fine. So she starts in Prospect Park and goes to a weekly event that's like April to October, once a week, called Smorgasburg.
Berg, not Borg.
Yes.
Okay.
And she talks to the founder of it, and they just talk about, it kind of seems like, it seems a lot like the food truck things you see in Portland, where it's like all these little stands. They're not food trucks, but they're little stands. And it's all these chefs. And they were saying one thing that's great is that you're actually talking to the person who made the food, who's selling it to you. So you can talk all about their food. And so...
Oh, you must have loved this episode, Cheryl.
So much. She has all this great food. There's all these fun fusions that she gets to try and all sorts of different ethnicities that are represented. One really interesting conversation is she has with a young woman from Pakistan, and she came over to New York when she was 18 to go to culinary school and then wanted to stay and live in Brooklyn. And her mom said, no, you need to come back home. You shouldn't live in Brooklyn, until her mom came to visit. And when she visited, she said, I love Brooklyn. And then now she brags about how her daughter lives in Brooklyn. So that was just kind of a cute thought, is that like Brooklyn isn't necessarily the stereotype that people picture. And it is pretty different than New York, like Manhattan Island proper. And so, and I mean, I agree. I think when I went to Brooklyn, it seemed very different than what I expected. So that was kind of neat. And then she goes to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and it was off limits for a long time, but now it's open for people to come. So there's a historical museum, and she talks to the people there, and then they talk about how there's all these different manufacturers there. And so she asks which ones are things that she can eat or drink. And I love her. So then we see her go to a whiskey distillery, and they talk about they just talk about his whiskey. It looked like I would love to be on that tour. And she gets to try some right out of the barrel. But one thing they talk about that was really interesting is that whiskey has to age for a while before it's ready to drink. And so wine can age, or you can have it like the next year. But with whiskey, you have to wait longer. And so he was talking about how in a lot of cities, distilleries have younger whiskey because they haven't been open as long, because the effect that the prohibition had on distilleries in cities compared to the country was different, because in the country they could just board it up, and then when the prohibition was done, they could open it again. So you get all these whiskeys like from Tennessee or things like that,
right?
But not necessarily from New York City, because those places like became other things because, you know, land is so valuable, or a shop or things like that. So distilleries in cities are still kind of a newer thing as they're able to open again. So I had never thought about that before. And also the whiskey looked really fun. So, and then she goes to another neighborhood, to Court Street, and there's all these old businesses. She goes to a business called the Brooklyn Pharmacy and Soda Fountain. And they're owed.
Hopefully they don't mix those two things together.
Well, it's pharmacy with an F. I think it's like the cute old school diner soda fountain.
Okay.
Type of thing. And it's so fun because like all ages go there, and they're bringing back a drink called the egg cream. Have you heard of it?
No.
I've heard of it because of the Judge John Hodgman podcast, because comedian John Hodgman lives in Brooklyn. And I don't know if he talks about this place, but he talks about the drink, the egg cream. It's kind of like a chocolate milk, but it has a lot of seltzer in it. And
chocolate milk that's bubbly?
Yeah.
Okay.
I must.
What does that have to do with egg?
I have no idea. There's not egg
cream.
in it. I mean, the cream, maybe the milk aspect. But so they're kind of bringing back this old school drink.
Okay.
So she talks to the owners, their brother, sister, and that was all adorable. And then she goes to a neighborhood called the Gowanus neighborhood, and it is a more affordable area, and kind of maybe like not known for being as nice of an area, or people think about crime or different things there. So she was talking about this area, and that she likes exploring something that's unique and local. And she talks about how it's the opposite of major tourism centers, that you have to kind of look for those fun restaurants or holes in the wall or fun shops or things like that. And so, but I thought it was interesting how she described that it's the opposite of major tourism centers. And that's what she likes about a neighborhood like that. Kind of getting away from the main area. But they talk about the canal there, the Gowanus Canal. Apparently it's really historic and is a big part of New York's history. And she talks to an author and historian who loves this canal and has written about it. And a quote I like that he said is that one of the greatest things about New York is that we can see the beauty in the ugliest things, and we're even a little proud of that. And so he talks about like the beauty in this canal that also is one of the most like polluted places. So it's interesting. And then she goes to a business that has shuffleboard there. It's like a shuffleboard. It's called the Royal Palm Shuffleboard Club. And
it's a club.
It looked kind of like people going to a bowling alley, but it was a shuffleboard place. And she was talking with the owner, and like she was like, is this a little hipstery? They were trying to figure out like, is it hipstery? And the owner said that she was like, personally, I'm the 42nd best female shuffleboard player in the world, And
Wow.
they opened with a Kickstarter campaign. Just the neighborhood decided, kind of backed this project, and that's how they opened their business. And all these different ages come and want to play shuffleboard. And so she was like, no, we very sincerely love shuffleboard here. And then she gets a lesson in shuffleboard, so that was fun. And then our final place was a neighborhood called Bed-Stuy. It's Bedford Stuyvesant, but a lot of neighborhoods in New York are like shortened to just like letters or first syllables or things like that. She talks to an author and architectural historian there who loves Bed-Stuy, and once again kind of like is talking about like a hidden gem type of place. And they talk about the Brooklyn brownstone, like that famous home, and they go to the boys' high school, which is one of her favorite buildings there, and she calls it a masterpiece, and that it showed that Brooklyn was independent from New York in its own place. And she said, this woman said that architecture and the people are the main assets of Bed-Stuy. So she talks about how important all those things are. And then they go to a bed and breakfast that at night in their parlor has jazz music. And so it becomes a little jazz club, and I wanted to be there so bad. And it looked so fun. Or I wanted to own it, one of those two things.
Or both.
Yeah. And then we get the ending with people are interviewed and kind of make statements about Brooklyn. So that was the Brooklyn episode.
Wow. Do you feel like that matches your experience of being in Brooklyn?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't see those specific things, but I think the overall feel of it was really similar. I was visiting a friend of the show, Emma, in Manhattan, and then we went out there for the day. So we just took the subway out there, but walked along the river, which reminded me so much of the Green Lake neighborhood in Seattle.
Oh,
right
interesting.
along there, and saw different like art installations and this really fun coffee shop, and so many families just out walking. That was a big thing I saw there. And then I actually got to go in a brownstone, which was very fun because her boss had like some art show in her home that night, and so Emma was going to work it. So I kind of walked on my own for a while and walked through some parks and past all these gorgeous buildings, and then got to go to that home. And so it was fun actually going inside of a brownstone, since they're like this famous style of New York home. And and it was fun to just see New York people being fancy at an art thing too. That was very fun. But yeah, the neighborhood felt much more like, I mean, it was much shorter buildings than Manhattan, like 2 to 3 story buildings, and way more like families and small neighborhood feeling and everything. So I think that this episode represented really similar things and so much history, which is really cool too. So
yeah.
So Ryan,
Yes.
which episode did you watch from a place that you've been to?
Yeah, I also watched an episode from season 1. I couldn't figure out that they actually had any of these episodes numbered, so I couldn't find any sort of number scheme. So I can't give you an episode number, but it was from season 1 on Ireland's northwest coast.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and so I was in Ireland a little over a year ago, and we did sort of a drive around the perimeter of almost the entire island, which was cool. And what was interesting about the episode is she goes up in the corner that we didn't actually hit. So we went through the very first city that she talks about, Sligo. I think it's Sligo. And so she talks about that one, and then she goes up into another portion that we didn't really go to. But that was also really cool to see, and of course now I got to go back to Ireland, right? So in Sligo, she talks to this scholar. He's a Yeats scholar who is an Irish poet, and he's quoting Yeats' poetry quite a bit, which is interesting, but I also had trouble following because it's poetry and there's the Irish accent. So when you put the two of them on top, it sounded wonderful, but I wasn't quite sure what was going on. But they kind of talk about that and a little bit of the background of that sort of kind of poetry culture and what that means to Sligo. And then they do this really interesting. So there's a doctor, like a medical doctor, and she goes out with her into the tidal zone on the Atlantic Ocean, and they harvest seaweed because and it's not a farm per se, because it's all just kind of out there, but they go and they harvest seaweed and they make like seaweed salad and all these different things from all these different seaweeds. And so she's, describing this seaweed and that seaweed. And then Samantha's like, oh, well, that's the one that I'm used to seeing, because I guess she's from, what did she say, Connecticut or something? I don't remember, but somewhere on the East Coast. So having been on the other side of the same ocean, which is kind of interesting. So that was kind of interesting, and how they, there's different seasons for different types of seaweed, and some of the stuff they grabbed and just ate right there when they're in the ocean, more or less. So that was kind of cool. Then they go to Donegal, which is up north a little bit farther, and you talk to a sheep herder, and he's got his dog that he has trained, and he's got the whistle, and you see like the dog do all these really cool, very, very precise movements based on the whistles and the commands to kind of herd the sheep. And so that was kind of a cool thing. And then she drives a little bit and she says something that, like, I was like, yes, I agree with that. There's a lot of just trusting the road will be there when you're driving in Ireland. And I was like, yes, because, you go around a corner and you can't see that there's going to be a road around the corner. So you're just hoping that it's going in the direction you hope. So I was like, yep, I can identify with that.
That was one of the first things you talked about when you did your Ireland episode, was the roads.
Because that was one of the first things that we did was drive. And so then they go to a local pub and they meet this guy who is, he's got to be at least in his 70s, I think, or because he's been hand weaving tweed for 61 years.
Whoa.
Yeah, and she's talking to him. He's got his big, I don't know what it's called, but his loom, I think is maybe what it's called.
Sounds
the big,
like a word.
Like wood thing that you do it, so it's wood and strings, and then he just weaves the tweed.
Wow.
And he'll do a whole bunch, and he's been doing it. He said when he started, there were several hundred that did it by hand, and now he's the last one.
Wow.
At least in that town, maybe, not all across Ireland, but so that was kind of cool to see. And he can do 15 like throw sized blankets in a day.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's just amazing. So that was super cool to see him do that and hear about what that was like. And then they go up on these cliffs and that just kind of overlook the ocean. And that's just quintessential Ireland. I didn't go to those particular cliffs, but they were gorgeous. Apparently they're 2.5 times higher than the cliffs of Moher, which are the super famous ones that everybody typically goes to. But there's significantly less people and less tourists. And while they were there, the guy was saying that, that was the height of their tourist season right there when they were like at that time when they were filming, but it was not crowded at all. Like, yeah, there were a few people, but spaced out, walking on trails around there. And I was like, that's the level of crowd that I would like to experience.
I think she does try to find the not super touristy places. Even as we were perusing her episodes, it seemed like it wasn't like the top largest cities in the world, or things like that.
Right. Yeah. And okay, here's my little science geeky part that I enjoyed. Apparently those mountains, which is there, it's called the Sleeve League, I think. Slieve.
Okay.
I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. But apparently it's part of the same original mountain chain that forms the Appalachian Mountains in the United States.
Whoa.
From way back when, and they've just separated across the Atlantic Ocean as it split. He didn't say this, but I was like from Pangea.
That's
So
cool.
that's kind of cool. Yeah, I thought that
Yeah.
was cool to know. And then they go into another pub and talk with three sisters who are part of a Gaelic Irish musical group that sing and
Yeah.
play music. And they talk a little bit about how there's three different dialects of Gaelic in Ireland, apparently. And she goes into a little bit of the history and is asking about like what, why is it spoken? It wasn't for a while. Apparently it used to be regarded as the poor man's language, is what they said. And so it was kind of discouraged to speak in Gaelic instead of speaking in Irish. But they've been trying to kind of bring it back and kind of have a resurgence of their, historic language, which I thought was really, really cool. And there were 9 children in one family, in that family. And then 3 of the sisters were all in this one musical group, which was really cool. And so, I mean, that was kind of the whole episode, but it was instead of, I'm going to go to this thing and this thing and this thing, it was, we met this person and these people and this person. And it was just really, really cool to see just kind of that off the beaten path again, like you were describing, just Irish way of life of just, hey, it's just cool. And we're just hanging out. And, Ireland is just a gorgeous place in the first place, but then to see that area that is, just off a little bit from where most people go, because at least for us, we drove through Sligo and then we went into Northern Ireland, which is kind of the separate country along the northern part of the island. And this section is parallel to that, but on the western corner.
Okay.
And so we didn't go through much of it because we were going into Northern Ireland. And I'm guessing that's what most people do if they're going to go up through there. But no, I've got another place I need to go, Cheryl.
Yeah. Yeah. And I gotta go to Ireland.
Oh, you do. Daryl would love it.
Yeah. Well, because I'll go anywhere. So then I'm like, okay, where does my introvert husband want to go? Nature-loving introvert husband.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and you can and there's big cities too. So you can go to big cities and do big city things. But even like once you get out of pretty much Belfast, Dublin, or Galway, like those are your big 3 cities on the island. Everything else is pretty small.
That's so fun.
It is. It really is.
So Ryan.
Yes, Cheryl.
Do you feel like this episode matched your experience in Ireland?
Similar to how you answered the question, I didn't go to all of these same places that she did, but I do feel like the countryside and the beauty and just the wonder of the Irish people. I don't know if you remember from the episode that I talked about my trip last year, but Serena, Tom, and I, since the 3 of us traveled together, we were just amazed by how friendly and genuinely nice the Irish are. And I think that really did come through in the episode as well. And so that the spirit of Ireland, I feel like, was really captured in the episode. And that matched what the spirit of what I experienced when I was there, even though I didn't go to all those same places.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So then
we watched an episode for somewhere neither of us have been.
That we already had on our list, I'm pretty sure. Oh
my gosh, but so much more now. What did we watch, Cheryl?
Well, I wrote down the short version of the title, New Zealand.
Oh, no. So this is a season 3 episode, so the most recent season, and it's the top of the South Island, which I thought originally when I read that title that it was this kind of just, a generic region, but the locals talked about it and they called it the top of the South Island.
Which is so cute.
So that must be a designation of a particular part of the South Island of New Zealand.
Yeah. And so, man, I want to just take her trip pretty much.
I mean, it started out in wine country, Cheryl,
yeah,
and I knew you were excited.
Sure did. did. Yeah. So she started in Marlborough at the vineyards and talked to two different people who, what's the name? I love wine. Why do I not know this? What's the name of the people who make the wine? Well, farmers. The second guy was a farmer. But gosh.
A vinter?
That sounds like a thing too.
Because they're vines, right?
Oh, yeah, that would make sense.
Oh, I guess those are probably just the people who take care of the grapes. Maybe they're not
winemakers. She talked to winemakers.
I'll Google it.
And so the wine specifically that grows well in that area.
Oh, vinter.
Nice job.
Hey, a winemaker or vinter is a person engaged in winemaking, according to Wikipedia.
Nice.
Yes.
Well, we could pretend to do a smooth cut, which I'm not going to do. She spoke with two different vinters. And Sauvignon Blanc is the specific type of wine that they make there. And she then got to have it with local clams. And I was all kinds of jealous of that.
I bet you were.
Oh, man. And this like amazing location as well.
Oh, it was beautiful. Just out there with you, just the vineyards and the flatland. Oh, yeah.
And
The location was gorgeous.
In the
Yeah.
background. And what I appreciate, so I was thinking about this because I want to take over her travel show. So I was picturing myself, you know, being a guest of being a host of Samantha Brown's Places to Love. I'll keep the title. No, I'm going to do it like Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, and we're going to do Cheryl Webster's Samantha Brown's Places to Love. But I was thinking there are so many shots of her eating, and how does she do it? And if I was like, man, I'm on a show and there's going to be a lot of times where I'm eating, I'd be thinking about, what do I look like when I'm eating? But what I appreciated about the cinematography was, for example, when she's drinking this wine and trying this clam, they do a shot that's a little lower and further away so you can get the mountains in the background and then the green and the vineyard. I mean, oh my goodness. It was a beautiful shot. And it was a beautiful shot, and it was very nice to her that they didn't do an up close of her eating right then as well. Because I was thinking about that one. Then she goes on the mail boat.
That was so cool. Now, I had trouble understanding like where exactly they were. I think they were on all of those. There's a bunch of little tiny islands. I think just at the top of the South Island, like the north end. So I think that's where they were, but it was not clear to me exactly where they were. Yeah. But there's a bunch of different island places that are pretty remote, and the way they get their mail is a boat. A boat will bring it to them. I think they said like 3 times a week or something.
3 times a week in the winter, 6 times in the summer.
Right.
And yeah, talk about living remotely. And so she engages in some conversation with people about living remotely. So one conversation they had that I thought was really interesting is that there's people who live remotely that just want to not have a lot of interaction with people and want to live remotely. And then there's people who live remotely and are very happy to see someone like the person on the mailboat. And so she talks with the woman who works on the mailboat about her relationships that she's developed with these people. And she even has treats for the dogs. So we see a couple of different dogs that come barking every time. But it was just a little neighborhood meetup when it was happening. And it was so sweet and adorable. One man even gave them recycling. So I think they talked about a little bit how they might take things as well when they're going.
Yep. They we meet one kind of family on a long dock that they have a sign that says it's Nydia Bay. And they talk about a couple of things that I think is kind of interesting, that in winter, it's about 65 degrees. So it doesn't get that cold. And the woman says that 350 days of the year, it's just quiet.
Yeah. Daryl cannot know about this place. Unless there's internet, and then I might be okay.
Well, I didn't get the sense that they were roughing it. Now, we didn't really see any of the houses up close because they were all off. They weren't really right on the waterfront. They were kind of up
Removed,
in
yeah.
the hills a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, the houses, we got a couple shots far away. They looked like, I don't think they were roughing it either.
No,
Yeah.
it
They
didn't
looked
look
like
that way to
nice
me.
living situations. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe I would love it. There we go.
Maybe you would.
And then they go to Mills Bay Mussels. And they meet, this is such an interesting family.
Well, and this is the same woman, I think, from Nydia Bay. It's her family.
Well, yeah, it is. But
so
it's she's so interesting to me that they have these 4 kids and they just wanted to take the business opportunity and kind of have a unique situation. Yeah. So they farm these mussels out where they live, and then they bring them back. She said from where the mail boat first came from is where they have this mussels tasting room, but then they also export mussels to all over the place, and those were massive mussels. I didn't know that mussels from New Zealand were super big like that. That was really interesting. I love mussels. That was so fun. And so
they've got this green kind of flare on one of the edges of their shells that I thought was kind of cool.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the daughters were running the place and being interviewed. And so it truly is a mussels tasting room. So she got to try beer battered, grilled, bacon wrapped, and then smoked was on the salad with the dipping sauce. But they talked all about mussels, and she got to learn how to shuck a mussel.
Yep.
Oh, that was so great. Yeah, that looked really fun.
Thought you would love that.
Yeah. And then we go to Nelson.
Yeah, I found this actually really interesting because they go to a museum called the World of Wearable Art. And just by the name, that doesn't sound like something I would be interested in. Nope. I'm generally not a big fan of kind of modern art, contemporary art. I just don't get it most of the time. Not that I don't think it's good or that it's not talented. It just goes over my head. I'm just not that creative.
Or fashion. You normally wouldn't want to like go to a fashion museum.
No. Oh gosh, no. But I found all of those things incredibly cool looking.
Really?
I did. I think partly because it's kind of like this idea of, you see like the Paris runway and these outfits that are like, oh my gosh, those are so gaudy. Those are over the top. What's the point? Mm-hmm. But then when this woman was describing these different kind of outfits, but as a piece of art that is worn and that is the intention, I think that changed the frame for me. And then, to see, they showed some video of when they would do some of the shows and they would do the ways some of the fabric would move when the model was wearing it and would move their arms or whatever. And I just thought there were some really interesting ideas in that as a piece of art. As a piece of clothing, not so much. Very not practical.
Well, and I think you're right. There were a lot of items there that could easily be in Fashion Week taken seriously as a piece of clothing,
which I think is ridiculous.
But the idea of it being wearable art is, I think, the idea behind a lot of things on the runway. But you're right, it's framed differently here. Well, and this woman whose museum this is has a yearly competition for these pieces. It sounds like it's all over the world that people enter from, and one of the largest arenas or performance spaces that they have the competition. It was so fun. And once again, it was all this woman sharing her passion for these pieces. Yep. And that was really great too. Yeah.
And then we go to is it Abel or a Bell? I don't remember. Tasman National Park. I think it's a Bell.
Yeah, to Arawa Beach.
Yeah. They go to this beach and this guy tells a story of how for some reason it's a national park, but this one beach was privately owned. And then it's going to go up for sale. And this guy gets this idea and gets all of New Zealand behind this idea. I don't know if they did a Kickstarter, but it was something similar to that, and decides, why don't we buy this beach and give it back to New Zealand? And so they crowdsource $2.3 million to buy back the beach and just have it be part of New Zealand instead of a private beach so that all of New Zealand can enjoy it.
Yeah, he said 10% of the population contributed to this. It was
Which
beautiful.
is crazy.
And he said the idea happened on Christmas Day. And so they were like, well, it's Christmas. It should be a gift to the people.
Yeah.
I loved that.
And the beach was beautiful too.
Oh my gosh, that was so beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, just kind of the white sand beach with the really blue water. I mean, it looked like a great beach.
It looked like a private beach, which it was.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
Well, and I think at first when she started the story about this man, I thought, oh, his family's just really rich. And so they bought the beach and then gave it to the people. Still amazing. But
yes.
I thought they had the money. And then it turns out they did not have the money and they crowdfunded it. And that was so cool. And that the people were really behind that was really neat. Yeah. And then we get to the last part of our episode.
We do, which I loved on multiple levels.
And I think what was fun is, so she goes to a place that was filmed in Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
By helicopter.
Yes.
And as she's in this helicopter, she's speaking with this man and his son who have been pilots for years.
Yep.
And she says, when people found out I was coming here, they couldn't believe that I wasn't going to Hobbiton. And so she said, I thought I should do something from Lord of the Rings. But I loved that now I'm seeing this style with her, that she's doing a bit of an off the beaten path. Not totally off the beaten path, but not necessarily trying to hit the top 5 things to do in New Zealand for this episode.
Yep.
She's really kind of digging in and finding the people that live there and what they're passionate about and what this culture is all about. And so I appreciated the way she went about a scene from Lord of the Rings being featured in this episode.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if I ever get to New Zealand, when I get to New Zealand, I don't know. Depends on how optimistic I'm feeling. I definitely still want to go to Hobbiton and do those things.
Sure.
But this is something that is, this might be, well, it'd be hard because the whole trip would be a splurge. But I might splurge to do this helicopter tour because it was amazing. Because literally they said you cannot access this other than by helicopter.
She couldn't even figure out how they were going to land the helicopter. This guy's dad had to build the landing pads in this area.
Yeah, except it wasn't even a landing pad. It was still the side of the mountain. I don't know if you remember when they landed.
Yes.
They land, and it was like, wait, why are you can land there? And up there, leveled out enough of the ground, but it wasn't, like a helipad, the big giant circle with an H on it or anything. And the spot was breathtakingly gorgeous.
Yeah.
When they just, it's been a while since I've seen the Lord of the Rings movies. I enjoy them. I'm not as into Lord of the Rings as I am Star Wars, but I do enjoy Lord of the Rings. And so I didn't immediately recognize which spot it was, but as soon as they said the scene, I don't remember the sequence, but when the crows find them and like the crows fly over and they have to hide under the rocks. As soon as she said that, I was like, oh yes, I can see it. And it's these rocks that just kind of come up and they're rounded, and there's one formation that I think they call the hand of God.
Yeah.
Where it's 3 fingers and a thumb, but I can totally see it. And they kind of look like these jointed fingers that are just kind of coming up out of the hill itself. And it was just beautiful, just the hills and mountains and the view. And then they have high tea.
Which she brought her own teacup.
And she brought her own teacup. But they call it high tea because they're up so high.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, that's so awesome. And then they're just quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear, and she asks, what's that sound we're hearing? And he says, oh, it's all of the different waterfalls all around as they are splashing down and then joining the river. And that's just what you hear. Ugh. It would be so cool to do that and go there.
Yeah. Well, and I loved that. So it's Bill Reed's company, and they provided transportation for Peter Jackson and the people in the Lord of the Rings. And I guess he told Peter Jackson, you have to check this place out. And he said, well, we already chose our locations. We're already good to go. And he said, no, you really need to check this place out. And so he flew him to Mount Olympus, and they changed the plan because of seeing this area. Yeah. And even in person, she said it looked green screened, the background.
Yes.
And she was like, it's so gorgeous. I don't understand how those mountains are actually there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my. And she also said, I feel like we're either at the end of the earth or the beginning. He said, well, we're in Middle Earth.
Yes. Which that was funny. Yep.
And that was our episode.
She did say something at the end that I wrote down for you, Cheryl.
Okay.
The very end, when she does kind of her recap, she said, it's a foodie destination for sure.
Oh boy. Okay. So Ryan.
Yes, Cheryl.
Based on the title of our show, Take Me With You, if you could take yourself to just one thing from this episode, what would it be and why?
It would be Mount Olympus. It would be that helicopter trip, because there were so many things that were gorgeous and beautiful and awesome, but that would definitely be it. What about you? What would you do?
I would take a to-go bag of the mussels with me to Mount Olympus.
You'd have them pick you up from outside the mussel place. And then...
Yeah. I mean, a mussel tasting room. Come on. But also, I would go to Mount Olympus as well. That was so unique and so gorgeous.
Yeah.
I mean, when it looks fake in a movie because of how beautiful it is, then you gotta go.
Yeah. Cheryl, did this episode make you want to go to the top of the South Island of New Zealand more than before watching the episode?
Yes. And it got me thinking, I mean, a lot of this podcast and these shows we've been watching have got me thinking about how I choose the places I go to. And this show in particular got me thinking, how am I getting off the beaten path, or just kind of experiencing local things more, or just being around tourists less when I go places. And so I think that's something that in general sounds intriguing about New Zealand, is that I still don't think there'd be a lot of places overrun with tourists from the impression I get. But yeah, I think the idea of visiting some more like remote areas where you just see the beautiful nature sounds really appealing to me.
Yeah.
How about you?
Oh, 100 times yes. I mean, New Zealand has been on my list for a long time, but that kind of the North Island, South Island, I know more about the North Island. And I've heard that the South Island is a lot more for the picturesque beauty. And there's not as many, quote unquote, sights to see on the South Island. But now that I've actually seen it and see what it looks like, oh my gosh, yes, that would just be gorgeous. That would be gorgeous.
Ryan, did this show make you want to travel with Samantha Brown?
I would say so. I think, kind of like we've already talked about, she's incredibly pleasant and genuine. And one of the things that you and I have talked about off air about our podcast is how tricky it can be sometimes to ask good questions of guests. And I was really impressed with the questions that she asked to the different people that she encountered. It showed both an intentionality as far as getting, asking very specific questions, but also she listened and then asked follow-up questions and showed how genuinely interested she was in the things that they were explaining. And I don't know that we encounter that super often. I don't know that I encounter that super often in my life. Not that I think most people are super dismissive, but the level of interest that she communicated, even just from her body language in whatever the person she was interviewing was telling them, I thought was really, really phenomenal. And like, that's the sort of person I would want to be around. And then she goes to wonderful places.
Yeah.
So yes. What about you?
Yes, for all of the reasons you shared. And I would enjoy some food with her for sure. She really appreciates good food. So that's a fun person to be around.
Yeah, for sure. Would you recommend this show, Places to Love, with Samantha Brown, Cheryl?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like I said, time and time again at this point, it's short and sweet, which I think is good with a travel show. I think confined to the length, she fit the right amount of things in this episode where we weren't rushing and it wasn't getting boring. And she's delightful and she highlights some really great things. I think people could learn a lot about a place she visits and be entertained.
Yes. I would agree with that. I would totally recommend this show. I think if you are trying to plan a trip to a place, this is not going to give you tips on how to access all the main sites. But it could give you insights for some of those places that you talked about to go that might be less touristy, and give you a little bit of an idea of if you do want to experience a little bit more of the local flavor or see something that has just less people around. This might give you some interesting ideas on both places like to go in a particular country or city, or also just kind of, ways to interact and things to see.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yay!
We did it. We did our last travel show review, Cheryl.
Yeah, so next week we are going to do a recap of these 11 shows that we've watched.
And I'm going to make you rate each one.
Oh, gosh. Well,
No,
I'm not going to attend then, but... and then after that, we'll get back to having guests on again.
Yes, which will be super fun. But for now, we're going to move to the last segment of this episode called Wish You Were Here. During this section, Cheryl and I will each highlight a travel attraction from the different places that we have been. It's just a little snapshot of a really cool thing. Maybe it's a museum, maybe it's a restaurant, just a really cool thing, kind of like, hey, this was really cool. I wish you were here. So Cheryl, what would you like to do for your Wish You Were Here today?
I would like to talk about a little town outside of Malaga, Spain, called Mijas. And I think I've probably shared about this town at some point on this podcast. It's a white town, which is not racist. It means that all of the buildings are white. So it's striking. Just it's in the hillside, and all of these white buildings with little blue flower pots along them are there. But on Wednesday afternoons, they have a free flamenco show in the courtyard.
Just outside.
So it's already very cool to go to Mijas. It's awesome. And then also you get your flamenco in. So 2 for 1 as far as I'm concerned.
That sounds wonderful. Unless it's 110 degrees outside, which it could potentially be.
I mean, sure. Yeah.
Then it would be less delightful, but still awesome.
How about you, Ryan?
I would like to recommend the Hoh Rainforest on the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State.
Yay!
Not a lot of people know that there's such thing as a temperate rainforest. So usually when we hear the rainforest, it's usually a tropical rainforest, which is in the tropics, near the equator, plus or minus 23.5 degrees. Of course, you all knew that. But there are also some rainforests in the temperate zones, and Washington State is one of those temperate zones. And so it's kind of on the far western side of the state, and it gets lots and lots of rain coming off the Pacific Ocean. And then also some of its moisture and rain, quote unquote, rainfall comes from fog as well. But it's a rainforest, and it's beautiful. There's tons of trees. There's hiking trails that you can do. It's not really near a whole lot. So kind of like we were talking about, going to some of those places there that are more off the beaten trail, you've got to drive quite a ways away from any really major city to be able to get there. And it's beautiful. And it doesn't rain every day there. So it's not like you're going to be hiking in mud necessarily, but you could be depending on when you go. But it's really, really fun. It's beautiful. They've got, I love just the moss kind of looking like it's dripping off the trees that I just think is great. And it's just so green and lush. So you've been there, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the Lebec Peninsula. It is so great. It's so beautiful. Really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely is. I guess that's all we've got for this week's episode, Cheryl. We would love it if people would follow us on social media. We are at TimWe Podcast. That's at TMWY for Take Me With You Podcast on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook.
You can also email us at timwepodcast@gmail.com. Send us suggestions of guests that we should have on, topics we should cover, and tell us about the most interesting conversation you've had with a local.
You can also call us and leave us a voicemail at 406-763-8699, also known as 406-POD-TIMWE. We would really appreciate it if you would rate and review our podcast, share about this episode on social media, and subscribe to our podcast to make sure that you don't miss an episode.
As always, thank you to Beth Reed Miller for her awesome artwork. You can check out more of Beth's artwork at Beth Is Something. And thank you to Erica Corbin for the use of her song Round the Globe. You can listen to Erica's music wherever music is sold or streamed.
Like Cheryl said, next week we're going to do a recap. We're going to look at all of these episodes that we have done so far this summer on travel shows and come up with something that isn't a rating system so Cheryl doesn't give up on the podcast. But until then, please remember to take me with you.
Take me with you.
Can we get a sailboat chasing down the sunset as we float round and round the globe? Salty air and balmy nights, guided only by the lights above, and a little love. Oh, the world is out there waiting to explore, and all our troubles